Welcome back in, everybody. Today we're going to look at some real life, usable, simple altered lines over a 2-5-1. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's jump into it. Okay, so last video we talked about the altered scale, how to derive the altered scale, how to practice it, what is it related to. If you haven't checked out that video, check the link below. Do your homework first because we do have some things that we need to understand before we jump into this practical application video on how to actually form lines using the altered scale. So I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, Nick, I understand where the altered scale comes from. I understand that there are these awesome tensions in it, but I have no idea what to do with it. This is a very, very common thing that I hear from my saxophone and jazz improvisation students all the time. They understand the concept, no idea how to practically apply it in solos. So our goal here is to really simplify. That is going to be the number one thing that we're trying to do. So let's talk about how we're going to simplify this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the altered scale and we're going to pull out a triad. All right, so let's think about a G7 altered scale. And now let's take a collection of notes from that G7 altered scale and let's make a triad out of it. The one that I'm going to make is an A flat minor triad. So if you think about that in terms of G7 altered, what we get is the flat 9, the 3, and the sharp 5. Those are the notes that we're pulling out of the altered scale. And those are the only ones that we're going to use. We're going to make this very, very simple on you. Now, there is one thing that we have to talk about. What are we going to do over the 2 chord? Well, this is really what makes the 5 chord effective. So here's what we're going to do with the 2 chord. We're going to pull a triad out of the 2 chord as well. So if you think about D minor 7, here are the notes that we're going to pull out of that chord in order to contrast with the altered notes. We are going to take a major triad built off of the 4th. So if you go up to the 4th note on a D minor 7 chord and you pull a major triad based on that, you get a G major triad. What is that? It's 4, 6, and 1 of that D minor chord. So we have a G major triad and we have an A flat minor triad. So what we're going to do is very simple. We're going to play a G major triad over the D minor chord, and then we're going to play an A flat minor triad over the altered chord, and then we're going to resolve it at the end to the key of C. So we've got a pretty inside part over the 2 chord, we've got a really tension-filled part over the 5 chord, and then we resolve it on 1. And the nice thing about working with triads is you only have 3 choices. So if you can remember 3 notes to play over a certain chord, it's going to sound great because it's very clear what we're doing. And you only have to remember 3 notes, so you don't have to deal with the 7 notes of the altered scale, get all mixed up, and end up just sounding like you're sort of noodling around the scale. This is a very clear way to improvise. So let's take a look at the first line. It's actually very, very simple. So what we're doing over the first measure is we're simply just arpeggiating that G major chord. We're coming down starting on the 5th, and then we're coming down starting on the 3rd. Now, when we get to the altered measure, remember, we switch to that A flat minor triad, and we do the same thing. We just very, very simply arpeggiate it. Now, the really important part of this is what we do on beat 1 over the C major 7 chord. And what you're going to notice is we're resolving it to the 9th. And that's kind of a cool thing you can do when you're coming off of altered, is resolve to the 9th. Normally, we think of resolving to the 5th or the 3rd. In this particular line, we're going to resolve to that 9th. I think it has a really beautiful sound to it. And then I'm just simply playing something that I think sounds interesting over the 1 chord that sounds really melodic. Just happens to be this line this time. So let's check out what this sounds like with no backing whatsoever, just to hear it totally on its own. Then we're going to actually do it in context. So you can hear that G major and A flat minor are really not that far away from each other, but the notes are very strategic. The ones that we're changing are really, I spent a long time deciding on this sound. So now let's check out what it sounds like with the actual chords behind it, because that's going to be a really important part for you as well. Okay, now let's go on to line number 2. It's the exact same concept. We're using the same structures over the same measures, but this time we're just sort of switching up how we handle the triads, and that will completely change the sound of the line. So in the first line, I was going all in one direction, right? Now what I'm doing is I'm really mixing up the direction that the triads are moving, that the notes are moving in, and that's really going to give me a very different texture to this sound. But you'll still notice all I'm doing is I'm using G major over the first measure, I'm using A flat minor over the second measure, and then I'm resolving. And this time we resolve to the 5th of the 1 chord. So a little bit more of a traditional resolution point in this second line. Let's check out what this line sounds like. All right, now let's check out what this one sounds like in context with a backing track, so you can hear all of that tension loaded up over the 5 chord. Now you'll also notice in the second line, I'm using the fact that I have an A flat in the A flat minor triad as a half step resolution down to the 5. In fact, I did that in both lines. The first one was a half step resolution down to the 9. Now this one is a half step resolution down to the 5. So hopefully this clarified things for you. All I want to do is go through the altered scale, pull out a triad, and then contrast that triad with something different over the 2 chord. Just remember to build that tension, and you don't need to use all 7 notes of the altered scale to play something meaningful. In fact, it's more meaningful the less that you play over it, but the more clear you are. If you've got any questions, please make sure you leave them in the comments section. Happy to answer those questions, get you guys going on this altered stuff. If you would like more of this, I am going to throw up a worksheet with 10 of these altered lines on our Patreon site, and I will link that below the video. Now, the Patreon for this channel is going to be a little bit different. It's not just for this channel. It's also the Patreon we use for our 10-minute jazz lesson podcast, which I know a lot of you listen to every week. So not only are you going to get these extra worksheets that we do with our YouTube videos, you're also going to get 1 PDF a week off of that podcast. We have over 200 episodes of that podcast. That means over 200 PDFs. And it only costs $3 a month to support this channel, support the podcast, support everything I'm trying to do here to get you better at jazz, to improve your skills when it comes to improvising. So if you're interested in that, please click the other link below the video. That will take you over to the Patreon, and you get instant access to 10 of these altered triad pair lines and also 200 other PDFs that go along with our 10-minute jazz lesson episodes. An ear training course, it never ends. The benefits just keep coming. They keep getting better. So if you enjoy this channel, please consider supporting us. Make sure that you hit that like button. Please do that before you leave. That really helps us in the algorithm to get out to more folks just like you. Make sure you subscribe and turn on that little notification bell. Our next video is going to be a Dick Oates altered line, so you can see what one of the masters of jazz has to say about playing over an altered chord. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Love doing this for you guys, and hopefully you're getting something out of it. All right, we'll see you on the next video. Have a great one, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye.